And then I'm going to talk about EMS in Rensselaer County with a little bit of extra focus on sort of the northern part of it. So to start with, I primarily work as an emergency medicine physician at Albany Medical Center. I am also an EMS physician, so I go out in the field and do things, etc. My main source, again, is through Albany Med Health. Albany Med has contracts with several agencies to provide medical direction for them, including the Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety, Sand Lake Ambulance, Community Emergency Corps, LifeNet, the Helicopter Service, and Hoosick Valley Rescue. And so they pay into Albany Med, but my salary is not sort of based on it, it's just part of some of my duties at Albany Med. And then I do get another much smaller paycheck from the town of Colony to be an assistant medical director for their EMS service there. So those are the sources of income for me, just so that we have full disclosure. Of any of those, right? It does not represent the positions of Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety. It does not represent Albany Med Health System, and it does not represent the town of Colony. It only represents my personal opinions and views on these things. And the data that I've collected through the Rensselaer County Dispatch Center and some analysis based on that and other public sources. I want to take a step back for just a second and have all of the first responders, the firefighters, the EMTs, the paramedics, the law enforcement officers, the correction officers, the dispatchers, please stand up for a second. Stand up, stand up, stand up. You get out of bed at ridiculous hours and you go and truly make a difference for everybody else. So I want to just say how much I appreciate it personally, and I think everybody in this room and much beyond this appreciates what you do every day. All right. So I'm going to start talking about Rensselaer County and its EMS system and some of the challenges that are involved here. So Rensselaer County has a whole bunch of different EMS agencies in it. There's essentially 14 different agencies, including the city of Troy. And then there's also Mohawk Ambulance Service, so I guess 15 really, which covers 3 separate municipalities, the town of Brunswick, the town of Postonville, and the city of Rensselaer. And it's sort of, because of all these different agencies, it's a little bit of a patchwork of the EMS system, and there's some challenges involved, and as a result of it being so fragmented. So in 2024, outside of the city of Troy, there were 12,809 EMS calls. The mean ambulance dispatch arrival time on high priority calls, so these are calls where ambulances and paramedics are using lights and sirens to try and get there faster because it's deemed by the dispatcher as being something that is potentially life-threatening, was 14 minutes and 18 seconds, which is okay. An ambulance arrives at high priority calls after 24 minutes and 1 out of every 10 medical emergencies, though. It's not quite as good. So there's a fair amount of tail to all this, where if you get somewhere in the mean, you get a pretty good response time. As you start up, get towards the tail of this, 1 out of every 10 people who call end up having a pretty delayed ambulance response. Paramedics arrive at the patient 76% of the time they're requested. Only 3/4 of the time that a paramedic is felt to be appropriate to take care of a patient do they actually make it to the patient. And there's a multitude of different sort of factors that contribute to this, and we'll talk about some of those here in a minute. But this isn't the whole story. This is aggregate data. This is the whole entire county. And so if you start to break things down individually by some of the individual municipalities, if you live in the town of North Greenbush, the mean ambulance dispatch time to arrival on high priority calls is a little bit shorter at 9 minutes. Right? An ambulance arrives at high priority calls in less than 15 minutes 90% of the time, right? So those windows sort of narrow down a little bit. And then a paramedic arrives on scene 97% of the time that they're requested. And the vast majority, I think there was 1 call last year where a paramedic was requested and never made it to the scene. The others represent where the paramedic or the ambulance was canceled on the way to the call primarily. If you live in the town of Postonville, however, the mean ambulance dispatch time to arrival for an ambulance on a high priority call is 27 minutes and 52 seconds, nearly a half an hour. Mean time. An ambulance arrives in 20 minutes or less on high priority calls, 30% of the time. And an ambulance arrives at high priority calls after 37 minutes, 1 out of every 10 times. So 1 out of every 10 people who call 911 get an ambulance on high priority calls where we deem it appropriate for lights and sirens to be used to try and get there fast after 37 minutes. It is a really, really, really long time to wait if you are having a true life-threatening emergency. Some of these, sometimes it turns out that things weren't quite as bad, but sometimes it turns out that things are just as bad as they sound. And the consequences of some of these delays can be catastrophic. As I said, I respond still out into the county. I have a fantastic relationship that I've been able to make between the Albany Mental Health System and Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety that lets me go out and try and help people when I can. So I've showed up at people's houses or to car accidents or to all sorts of things. But I see a lot of the results of this because I go to things where nobody else is going to. Nobody else can make it there. To give you a little bit more insight into some of the dysfunction that's going on, if you happen to live in the town of Postinghill, if you're in North Greenbush and you have a car accident down here by the Postinghill border, you'll have a 4 to 5 minute response time. 2 minutes or so to get out the door and about 2 to 3 minutes to get down the road to the accident. But if you drove another 100 feet down the road and happen to be in the town of Postinghill, when you have that car accident, you have a 20 to 30 minute response time. These are not necessarily faults of the individual agencies, but it is a fault of the EMS system being broken and dysfunctional and not allowing us to do what is the right thing, right, which would be to have the closest appropriate resource respond to these faults. But that is not the way the system is set up, unfortunately. If you live in these towns, you get a paramedic to arrive the following percent of the time they're requested. In Skodak, 52% of the time, you end up getting a paramedic when it's requested. Petersburg, 40%, Nassau, 27%, Steventown, 23%, Berlin, 19%, Grafton, 17%, Hittstown, 16% of the time. 16% of the time. And even if half of those didn't really require a paramedic, that is a lot of calls and a lot of people who are going without the care that they need and they deserve. The arrival time when they do get a paramedic to respond is also just as bad. Skodak, 22 minutes. Mean arrival time, which means there's a lot that are a lot farther out from that. 28 minutes for Petersburg, 29 minutes for Nassau, Steventown, 33 minutes, Berlin, 37 minutes, Grafton, 30 minutes, Hittstown, 26 minutes. There are some really long times to wait for the care, again, that can make a difference in these people's lives. 1 out of 10 emergencies and an ambulance arrives after 26 minutes in Nassau, Grafton, 28 minutes, Brunswick, 30 minutes, City of Rensselaer, 34 minutes, Postinghill, 37 minutes. Right? So whenever somebody dials 911 in this county, they roll the die. Okay? They may get a good response, no matter where they are, but there's a lot of us who are not getting good responses, and hopefully you're not the unlucky one when you really need it. 1 out of 10 times the paramedic does arrive, they arrive after 30 minutes in Skodak, 33 minutes in Town-Huzik, Brunswick 35 minutes, City of Rensselaer 36 minutes, Petersburg 36 minutes, Hittstown 36 minutes, Postinghill 38 minutes, Nassau 39 minutes, Grafton 40 minutes, Steventown 44 minutes, Berlin 49 minutes. You wait nearly 50 minutes to get a paramedic 1 out of every 10 times. The tail on all of these response curves is just, it goes out for a really long ways. And I think a lot of the responders in here, those first responders, sort of bear the brunt of this, especially the fire departments who are first responding, especially when they're sitting with somebody who's critically ill or injured. It is hard to continue to look those person in the eye and try and reassure them, yeah, somebody's coming, I swear somebody's coming. They're on their way, I hope somebody gets here soon before something bad happens. We have a reliability problem in the EMS system in Rensselaer County. Again, sometimes these responses are great, all the way across the board, but unfortunately, too many of the times, they are not. If you look at the response curves here, so this is the percentage of calls that fall within the 5-minute brackets there. So you can look at the towns of North Greenbush and Sand Lake, who have pretty robust EMS systems. And they actually have a pretty good peak at the, around the 10-minute mark or so. More than 50% of their calls are there. And then it falls off pretty quickly. There's a few calls out there in the tail after 20 minutes, but it's pretty small. But then you start to, and the results of this, by the way, are things like this. Last year, North Greenbush Ambulance had a fantastic year for cardiac arrest reversal rates. Right? So these are people whose heart stopped. These people are literally dead, right? And through getting there fast and having a high, sort of highly experienced and robust paramedic response that's able to initiate therapy very quickly, they had almost a record number. They had 4 people who ended up walking out of the hospital, were dead when they got there, and they ended up walking out of the hospital being able to be with their loved ones, right, for hopefully many years to come, right? This is the difference that this can make. Right? Doesn't happen all the time, and it's not perfect. It's not that this will guarantee anything, but it increases the chances that we can do things like this. But as you go sort of farther and farther out, these curves start to drop off and have longer and longer tails to them. So in here you can look at Nassau and Brunswick, which again has a much smaller peak, somewhere around the 20-minute mark, 15 to 20-minute mark, and then it goes for quite a ways. And you can go farther, right? You can go out to Grafton or out to Post and Kill. Those peaks are more like 20 to 25 minutes. And gosh, if you're on the far end of that curve, that is a really long time to wait. You can't breathe if you're choking, right? If you're having an arrhythmia, if you're having a heart attack or a stroke, you're lying bleeding the roadway from a traumatic accident. It's a really long time to wait. Paramedics, same sort of thing, not just ambulances. Paramedics are actually even a bigger problem for an even wider swath of the county. So again, North Greenbush and Sand Lake has a paramedic on every ambulance that they send, so their paramedic and ambulance response times are essentially identical. But again, those curves for Post and Kill, in this case Skodak have on there, close to 30 minutes, right, on a mean, and then there's a lot of, there's almost 50% who are out past that. A number of other communities, Petersburg, Nassau, Grafton, Kidstown, right? All of these really delayed paramedic responses. And again, these are the paramedic responses that actually happen. Most of these communities have less than 50% of the time that those paramedics are even available to go. And then you get really far out there at the 22 corridor, which is a challenge from an EMS standpoint. Some really great, fantastic providers out there who are really trying to do the best they can, but they are on their own out there. And when they do get paramedics, it is extraordinarily delayed. Here's town of Nassau for, again, paramedic arrival times, right? There is not a single paramedic that arrived before 15 minutes and a whopping 3 that arrived in 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. It's a long time. And even worse, go out to town of Berlin, it's really a challenge getting a paramedic there. Okay, the peak is out at the 40, 45-minute mark there. Do these times and these response rates matter? So I had somebody ask me one time, a fairly astute elected leaders who asked me, does this really make a difference? Will decreasing these times, will increasing the number of times you can get a paramedic to somebody make a difference? And I think the answer is a very clear yes. I think there's a lot of other providers in the room who would agree with that, a lot of other firefighters and EMTs, et cetera. I have a couple of stories, unfortunately, of what happens when we don't have a robust response. There have been a whole, actually the last 2 weeks have been terrible for the EMS system in Rensselaer County. We've had a whole number of sort of bad outcomes from a whole bunch of different cases that I think, you can't always predict it. And again, some people sometimes just have bad outcomes, but I think we could have done better. There was unfortunately a 50-ish female from the 22 corridor who passed out and sort of had a really fast heart rate, and then was not looking good, who ended up going into cardiac arrest a couple minutes out from the hospital. And they had tried paramedics to them multiple times, and were unable to get it. They were unable to get that person back. There was another call in the town of Grafton, unfortunately, for somebody that had called for chest pain. again, a 50s-ish male, would call for chest pain originally and unfortunately went into cardiac arrest just before the ambulance got there. Now these are people who are highly savable if you get there quick enough. Early CPR and early defibrillation. And the EMTs did exactly what they were supposed to do. They did a fantastic job actually trying to manage this patient. And they got the person back briefly with the first defibrillation. But then unfortunately very quickly the patient went back into it. And those are things that are medical. We give medications to prevent them from going back into that cardiac arrest or support them through it or help to get them out of it again. But there was a severe delay in the paramedic response, and one of the agencies that normally does not go to these calls, they followed their rules, but they went, but it was a very long way to get that care, and unfortunately that person did not have a good outcome. There was an extraordinarily similar case in the town of North Greenbush that had a very robust response, where somebody arrested just before the ambulance got there, and the paramedic crew did a fantastic job, gave multiple rounds of medication and defibrillations, and was actually able to get this person's heart beating again and breathing on their own. They're still good. They have a long ways to go to recover, and we'll be seeing yet whether it has a fully meaningful outcome, but that is the difference between these response times. There was another case, again within the last couple of weeks, of unfortunately a critically ill 16-year-old male in the town of, coming from Valley Falls, who the EMT got there and assessed the patient and recognized pretty quickly that this patient was not looking so good. Tried to call multiple times to try and get a paramedic. There was no paramedic available. She beat feet to Samaritan Hospital, where she was promptly told by some of the providers there that this patient might die because she wasn't able to get them all in bed. The patient, fortunately, was able to get stabilized a little bit and was later transferred and is doing okay. But this is a near miss. These near misses happen all the time. I have a letter from a provider that I'm going to read. This one's from a little bit, several months ago. It's the same sort of thing. To whom it may concern, I am writing this not only as a concerned resident, but also as an EMS provider in this county. Today, while working at Pittsdown Ambulance, we were dispatched to the Eagle Mills Fire District in the town of Rensselaer for a Delta difficulty breathing call. This call was approximately 18 miles from the Pittsdown Ambulance Station and a 16-minute response. The concern is that most of the time, not just in Pittsdown, but throughout the county, there is a lack of sufficient ALS paramedic ambulances to respond to high acuity calls. This morning was an unfortunate example of this as Mohawk Ambulance/ALS was not available to respond. The next in mutual aid was not available either, so Pittsdown Ambulance was dispatched. Upon arrival at the scene this morning, the patient was found not breathing and without a pulse, despite family reporting that the patient had been breathing at the time of the dispatch. To make matters worse, North Greenbush Ambulance was not dispatched initially at the time of the call, when their station is less than 2 miles away from the address of the scene, and was a 6-minute response. The only reason they did respond when requested was because the call was upgraded to an echo, and they were requested by the fire chief of Eagle Mills. This is after a request to Mohawk ALS again, as well as the city of Troy, both of which were unavailable. I feel that the response times and the choice of the ambulances to respond to this call had a major impact on the care and the possible outcome of this patient. The same factors that have led to poor outcomes for this patient endanger the well-being and care of other residents throughout the county, including inadequate availability of ALS ambulances, long response times, and poor cooperation and coordination between towns and ambulance agencies. Thank you for your attention on this matter. People are literally dying from this. And I see it. That's why I'm up here doing all this. I think a lot of the other first responders in the room see it as well. So, I think it matters. What are some of the reasons that this is happening? Because if we want to get to the bottom of fixing this, we have to sort of take a deep look, deep dive into why this is happening, and try and remedy some of those. So there's a couple of things that are going on. There's inadequate paramedic resources and poor interagency collaboration resulting in paramedic unavailability and severely delayed paramedic responses. So part of this is that every town is sort of walled off into their individual agencies, some of which their town funds robust EMS services. Examples of those include the town of Sand Lake, the town of North Greenbush, the town of Schaghticoke, East Greenbush. Right? They have pretty robust EMS systems. Their taxpayers sort of funded at an appropriate level. But as soon as you cross those town lines, which sometimes are not far from those ambulance services, if another town is not sort of funding their EMS service at the same level and can't reciprocate to the same level, it is no longer something called mutual aid, which mutual aid is where ambulances or paramedics are able to move back and forth across lines to support each other and back each other up. But if one community doesn't have a paramedic at all to be able to lend to the other one, the other community can't lend them their paramedic. It is no longer mutual. It is a one-sided thing. And so that actually happened in this county for a while. There was a lot of the paramedic level agencies would go out there and try and help all the other communities. But it became such a thing where they weren't getting reimbursed appropriate for it, that they couldn't support that any longer, especially when they started missing calls in their own district and their own taxpayers. And so all those agreements that were sort of working a long time ago have long since fallen off. And now we have these hard lines where ambulances are not allowed to cross or paramedics are not allowed to cross. And it has led to a lot of dysfunction. And not only that, the resources actually even in service lots of times. And I've sat there with some of these EMTs and paramedics listening to the radio, and they want to go help. They want desperately to go help. That is their job, that's what they do, that's why they went into this. But unfortunately, the politics and the financing of it have prevented that from happening. There's also delayed mutual aid ambulance responses due, again, to unequal investment in EMS resources between jurisdictions. So again, this is that crossing the lines. This is the difference between the North Greenbush side of the North Greenbush Postal Kill line and the Postal Kill side of the North Greenbush Postal Kill line. There's little to no EMS system oversight or accountability. This is partly due to there being so many different agencies in the county with so many different levels of service that they provide and of oversight that it's very difficult for anybody to sort of wrap their arms around the whole system and be able to really dig in and fix individual parts. As I said, my other hat that I wear is the Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety, and I am trying to do what I can from that standpoint, but it is very challenging to get all these systems sort of in line. And again, there's just, all this data is just coming out, but it's been there for a long time. It's just because it's very difficult to get to and very difficult to analyze. And there's nobody sort of looking over the system to see whether it's working or not. And then there's slow adoption of new technology, medications, and EMS practices. Again, I think we have some pretty robust EMS services in our county, including North Greenbush and Sand Lake, Hoosick Valley Rescue, and Blue and Rescue Squad. But if you go beyond this county, those services honestly are sort of midline, right? They provide pretty good service, they provide standard of care and adequate service, but they're not pushing the boundaries of things. There's a whole bunch of other things that they can do, or that they could do, right? Other places do sort of some fancy things called rapid sequence intubation, where somebody really needs a breathing tube, but they're not unconscious enough yet to put it in. That's sort of an advanced skill that you need extra hands to be able to do in a system where the providers are really skilled and work together. Blood products. So for the last almost 3 years now, the aeromedical industry, so LifeNet in this area, but in other areas, other helicopter services, have been allowed to initiate blood transfusions in the field for severely injured patients who are losing blood and need it. And this has been a game changer. There's other places around the United States that have been doing this on a ground aspect for a while and had fantastic results. Because many of these patients are young and have years and years of life left if we can just get them through to the hospital, et cetera. And so there have been transfusions that have happened that have been able to let somebody make it from the scene to the hospital, and the hospital can get them to the OR and take care of this. And those people will recover when previously they never had a chance. Right? This is something that is coming to the ground EMS world, right? So the ground ambulances. But it's tricky because blood is a precious resource. And so there's only going to be a few places that can have this to be able to go out. There's going to have to be a fair amount of cooperation. The funding stream for this, because doing this is actually fairly expensive. Again, I think it makes a huge difference in people's lives. But how to fund this and make this viable is something that's still a little bit challenging. There's been a whole series of meetings regionally about how to make this program work in the area. And I'll be honest, all of the counties surrounding us, right? So go south to Columbia County, or Saratoga County, or even Greene County, You go north from here, they're all have systems that are light years ahead of us and ready to implement this as soon as it becomes, as soon as there's regulatory approval for it, right? Here, we don't have any agencies that could take this on right now. I'm sort of trying to work with some to see if we can develop a system, but it's not going to be a thing for Rensselaer County for a while unless we fix our EMS system. Transport vents, again, are something that's happening in lots of other counties around us. Columbia County, Greene County have like full vents on all their ambulances. These are advanced things that we could be doing here, and that do make a difference. They make a difference in a smaller fraction of patients, and so they're considered sort of extra, but they do make a difference. But we can't even get close to doing that until we fix sort of the basics of the system. But this is a dream that we could get here, that we could provide this, that we could make a difference in people's lives. All right. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the difference between an EMT and a paramedic and why I think that matters, why getting a paramedic to patients that are really critically ill or injured matters. So EMTs can do a fair amount of things. They can do CPR, they can use an automated external defibrillator to shock somebody. They can do some basic airway maneuvers, put in OPAs or NPAs. They can ventilate somebody. They can administer oxygen and check the blood glucose. They can administer a couple of medications. They can give somebody an EpiPen or an albuterol treatment, or maybe some aspirin. They can administer naloxone and oral glucose. They can apply a tourniquet and a splint. So they can do a lot of different things, and they're absolutely critical to the EMS system. But if you are really seriously injured or really seriously ill, this stuff does not tend to cut it. So paramedics can do things like establish IVs and give IV medications and fluids, including pain medications. They're allowed now to transfuse blood products. They can place breathing tubes, perform surgical airways, interpret EKGs, perform electrical cardioversion or pacing, perform needle decompressions. So on the left side is sort of the EMT equipment, and on the right side is the paramedic equipment. There's a fair amount more over there on that right side that, again, if you are really sick and injured, makes a difference. So when is the paramedic sort of necessary? When is it really important? On that choking patient, that choking child that's unrelieved by abdominal thrust, an EMT has nothing left they can offer. All right? You need a paramedic that can go into the airway and try and pull that thing out. Or if not that, then push it down into one of the lungs so that the other lung can be ventilated, right? The cardiac arrest that doesn't respond to CPR and defibrillation, right? If we started CPR and defibrillated somebody a couple times, you can't get them back, they need medications to get them out of it. That defibrillation alone is not quite cutting it. Intractable seizures, they have absolutely nothing to offer. There was a young patient, unfortunately, who another ambulance service was so concerned about, stopped at the doors of Sand Lake Ambulance, still seizing, 20, 30 minutes later, still seizing, because the EMT had nothing else to offer. She was appropriately concerned and reaching out for help, but help isn't coming because you don't have a system to provide it. Low blood sugar, who's unconscious and unable to swallow. There was another recent case up again in the 22 corridor for a gentleman who had his blood sugar, he was a diabetic, his blood sugar just went extremely low, he was unconscious. Unfortunately, his heart was still beating, he was still breathing on his own. But they could not get a paramedic. When paramedics show up to those calls, lots of times they can start an IV and give the patient some IV glucose, and their blood sugar level comes up, and the patient wakes up, and they feel a lot better. And many of the times, those patients don't even have to go to the emergency department. We make sure it's up, we make sure they have a sandwich, and that they're not taking more of their insulin, and then call their doctor in the morning, and everything else is looking good, and there's nothing else wrong. Those patients don't necessarily have to waste time in the emergency department. They don't need the expense of it, and so they could be saved with that. But because there was no paramedic on this call, the person had to be transported, 20, 30 miles or whatnot, go away to an emergency department for 6 hours, get seen, and eventually discharged again, right? All of that could have been prevented by having a paramedic there to take care of that up front. Severe asthma exacerbations not relieved by albuterol, severe anaphylaxis that doesn't respond to epi, shock from blood loss, shock from severe dehydration, shock from severe infection, shock from decompensated heart failure, shock from cardiac arrhythmias, shock from spinal cord injuries, life-threatening high potassium levels, collapsed lungs from motor vehicle accidents, excruciating pain from fractures or burns. Right? Bouncing down the road in an ambulance with a femur fracture or a tibia fracture or a humerus fracture is pretty darn painful. That's unfortunately, what a lot of people go through without any pain medication, in my opinion, for no reason in this county. So where do we go from here? I don't like bringing up problems unless I have some solutions. And I have some solutions to offer. They may not be perfect, and I am happy to hear if other people have better solutions. In fact, I would love for that to be the case. But let me go through some of the possibilities that we sort of looked at and tried to see whether it could work. Right? So, one of the thoughts is, could there be a Rensselaer County municipal EMS service? Right? Could the county take on an EMS system? And unfortunately, in Rensselaer County, the way it is a really challenging thing to do, because there are places, again, that have relatively robust EMS services, are already paying for those services and want to sort of keep those services. And there are other places that do not have it, and then there's everything in between. So all these different communities have different needs and different, different levels of service that they're already providing. And so from a county perspective, to get in the middle of that is a nearly impossible sort of feat at this point in time. Right? If everybody were to be on the exact same page, it's a maybe, but I just don't think that it's a reality right now. And I don't think waiting around for that to happen is the right thing to do. I think we need to do something. Could the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Department form an EMS division, kind of like Albany County Sheriff's Office? It's possible. It also has many of the same challenges as Rensselaer County Municipal Service. I've talked to the sheriff about this. He's thought about it, but it's just not something he thinks he can do right now. So. Could there be a new Rensselaer County not-for-profit EMS agency that sort of covers the gaps or fills in between everything else? I suppose it's possible, but the funding stream for that, I don't know where that would come from. As I said, I don't think the county's going to take that on. Nor could they in sort of a reasonable way. The individual municipalities that don't have something currently, I suppose maybe, but it's hard to see that really coming to fruition. Which really leaves us with what I think is going to be the most likely to be successful sort of endeavor, and that is shared services / mergers between existing agencies, right? So again, we have some pretty good agencies that I think could potentially help out in other parts. And we have some other agencies, I think, that if they got together, they could provide much more substantial levels of service. And so this is sort of where I think things should probably go. The benefits of having shared services and mergers between existing agencies, more efficient and more cost effective, right? So many of the current agencies have, for example, they may run one ambulance at a time, but they have a backup ambulance. So we have all these different agencies that have backup ambulances, but how many of those backup ambulances do we really need if they're all one agency, right? Maybe where we have 3 backup ambulances, we could cut down to 2, right? And custom call stuff, things, et cetera. Same thing with management structures, et cetera, that are duplicated, so on and so forth. So I think there's some savings in there. It's not, it's not going to be a huge amount, but there's some savings to be had by having a larger, more robust system. I also think crossing the lines, you can be more, crossing town lines with ambulances, you can be more robust because you can utilize the ambulances that you have to take potentially some more calls than what are currently being taken, and have faster response times for them. You can have greater control over the EMS system variables that currently hinder prompt ambulance responses and paramedic availability. Again, if two towns or 3 towns or 4 towns are able to come together and provide one EMS, instead of there being these artificial services where one ambulance's district stops and the next one begins, despite the other one being closer, you can get rid of those lines, right? It just becomes the closest appropriate resource goes to that call. Okay. It's easier to have oversight and accountability. Again, with a larger system, we can collect more robust data when we have a bigger system. We can make sure that we're doing the right things, and we can change course if we're not. It allows somebody to sort of have oversight over the whole thing and some degree of accountability in whether it's working or it's not working. And then there's a greater capacity to be able to invest in new technologies, practices, procedures, such as, again, blood administration, video laryngoscopy, RSI, transport events, telemedicine. There's a number of other things that if we were really to get out there, and form a really robust EMS system that we could pursue. Some of which are trying to keep people potentially at home or out of the hospital, and can save sort of everybody in that aspect. We just need to be able to do it safely, and we have to have a robust enough system to be able to do something like that. what are the barriers to developing shared services or mergers sort of model for all of this? So EMS billing revenue, unfortunately, only covers about 50% of the cost of running a paramedic ambulance in general. And merging would require participating municipalities to agree on a fair way of sharing the remaining costs, right? So there has to be fair cost sharing for all this to end up working. Current EMS agencies have to agree to give way to new leadership and governance structures. So sometimes some of these agencies, they have a robust history that they want to preserve, and I totally respect that. But there's also some leadership disagreements or whatnot that I think sometimes gets in the way of progressing the system and making it more accountable and robust. And then the relationship between paid paramedics and EMTs and volunteer EMTs and drivers would also have to be carefully agreed upon. Volunteers have propped up this county for decades and decades. They have cared for their fellow citizens, at times of need. They've gone out there, they've woken up in the early hour mornings, and they've gone to work afterwards. They've done all sorts of things, and they deserve our respect for all this. And the question is finding the right place in the system for them to continue to be able to provide that care to their fellow citizens. But it has to be, I think it has to be in a more robust way that we can again address some of these response times, etc. So how would we pay for having shared services and mergers between agencies? So average billing revenue, and I collected a whole bunch of data between a whole bunch of different agencies here in Rensselaer County. Average billing revenue for a paramedic level agency in Rensselaer County is about $400 to $450 per call. So this is on average. It includes calls where an ambulance shows up to the home and maybe has to just help somebody up off the floor, they put them back to bed, they don't really want to go to the hospital. In general, insurance companies will not pay any money for that. Many times there's a small bill that the ambulance sends out to try and collect a little bit of money on it, but those may or may not get paid. And so those tend to be very little income. Other times the call is canceled, there's nobody there, etc. And then on the flip side of things, you have people who are transported to the hospital, which is where insurance companies do pay more for that. So if you average all that out over our agency's total call volumes, you end up with approximately $400 to $450 per call. This is based on 2023 numbers. What I've collected, and I don't have all the data yet, so I'm not ready to present it for 2024 as far as this part goes. But from what I've collected so far, it's close to $450 now. A single paramedic ambulance costs $850,000 to $900,000 per year to operate. An ambulance that does 1,000 calls, therefore, will generate somewhere between $400,000 to $450,000 in billing revenue, right? Which leaves another $400,000 to $500,000 for that paramedic ambulance that needs to be covered by the municipalities that are using it. Now, that doesn't mean that every individual municipality needs to pay $400,000 to $500,000. If you have several municipalities that are sharing that ambulance, then you can break up that cost in between them. And so how do you break up that cost? There's a couple different ways that we've sort of gone back and forth with a group of people over. Could you break it up based on the population in each town, or the call volume that happens in each town, or maybe the total market value? So after going around a whole bunch of times with this, I think I ended up, I think total market value of property in each town is probably the best way of going. Most taxes are based on that anyways. And the other benefits of that is that it reflects a little bit of population in it. It also reflects a little bit of a town's ability to pay for the service. And so this helps sort of extend the service to everywhere. I will also remind you, so that anybody here who drives probably doesn't drive only in their town, right? So if you get into an accident in your neighboring town, you should probably care about what happens over there, not just in your own town. So I started out, I ended up making somewhere around 20 different plans or whatnot. And they look something like this, where you break off different parts of the county, analyze roughly how many ambulances you would need, et cetera, where you could place them to get what would be reasonable response times. Added up the cost of all those ambulances, figured out what billing revenue you could have, take off that, and then you divide that up between the total market value in that area of the county. And so you can come out with different things. I also looked at what current towns were paying, and so if you look sort of on the left-hand side there, you have the individual towns, and you have what towns are currently paying, and then that cost per $1,000 is that second column there. So it ranges a little bit, right? So some towns, again, don't really pay anything right now. Some are relatively low at 10 cents per thousand. On the high end, it's closer to 70 cents per thousand. Right? If you average that out across the county currently, that's about 24 cents per thousand, and that again includes some places that aren't paying. And so if you calculate that out for a $300,000 house, it's about $72, I think it says up there, a year is what people are sort of currently paying for the system. To have a plan where the entire county is involved, that's actually, I don't have it up there, but plan one is that one, would come out to be 43 cents per thousand, so $128 a year for a $300,000 house. And again, I think that plan is pretty robust. The challenge to getting there, though, is I have to get so many people to agree all at the same time that I think doing that from the get-go is a near impossibility. It's something that I'd like to see, I'd love to see, I'd love to work towards, but I don't think it's something that can happen right out of the rip. And so many of these plans break it down into much smaller pieces, and so there's the sort of countywide plan. As I went through all this, I analyzed all these plans, and you can see it based on which town you live in and sort of compare. These are all based on $850,000 per ambulance and $450 per call and billing revenue, et cetera. And then you can cross-reference calls. There's some binders, I'm not sure where they got put up. Oh, up front here, if you guys want to take a look at it later and see sort of all those different plans and the rough numbers, et cetera. Some of the ones that apply to this northern part of the county, because this meeting tonight is up here in Brunswick, obviously. I think some of the smaller ones are probably the place to start, and then can hopefully grow from there. But for example, I think that if the town of Brunswick were to work with the town of North Greenbush, for example, that again you could have a reasonable sort of system. And on the high end, I think it's $126 for a $300,000 house to do something like this and have 3 ambulances so we cover the 2 towns. Again, this all has to be worked out. None of these are offers, but it's just what the cost analysis comes out with. Okay, so something in the ballpark of that. If you were to go with a slightly lower in the call volume between those two, let's see, it says it up there somewhere. Calls 2,900 there. The call volume, the question is, could 2.5 ambulances cover that? And maybe not quite as robustly, but it could be done. And if that were something to sort of get across the finish line here, I think that would be helpful. And so that plan is significantly cheaper there. So it's sort of a little bit depending on how robust you want to start with. The benefit of the town of Brunswick having a dedicated ambulance here, no matter who you use, whether you choose Mohawk Ambulance Service to do it, or you choose to try and work with North Greenbush or the town of Scatico, who's the rescue squad, or Pittstown, or whoever, right? The benefit of having a dedicated ambulance here is that you can then participate in the mutual aid system, which does not currently happen. Because there is no dedicated ambulance in the town of Brunswick, most of the other services, so your North Greenbush, Blizzard Valley Rescue Squad, Sand Lake Ambulance, Bruin Rescue Squad, none of those ambulance services will come into the town because there's nothing you have to send back to them that is reliable. If there were a dedicated ambulance here at the paramedic level, then they could potentially reciprocate. They'd have to be convinced that it's a robust system, right? And so that is the benefit of having a dedicated ambulance here. And I think that's why it's worth paying for, again, whether that be with Mohawk or, again, sharing services between other communities. On the flip side of things, you guys, the town of Brunswick here could partner maybe with the town of Scatico, Blizzard Valley Rescue Squad, who also already has a paramedic ambulance service. And you can see the calculations there. You can see it if it were 2.5 ambulances instead of 2 ambulances. And then I think there are some larger plans that also have a lot of benefit. So if you could get a 4-town model to go here, right? Scatico, Pittstown, town of Brunswick, town of Grafton, all to come together, you could potentially cover that area with 3 ambulances, I think fairly robustly. And the cost of that is not all that great, and you're covering a pretty wide area. And again, you'd be in the mutual aid system, so you'd have mutual aid from North Greenbush and from Sam Lake and from Bruin. And maybe even if Troy Fire Department is able to sort of beef up their response a little bit, maybe we could do mutual aid back and forth with the city of Troy. Or if we can go even farther, make it the whole northern end. Right? I think all of these models would be fantastic. I will say that many of these models are very challenging when you start to include the 22 corridor, because the call volumes are very low and the distances are very large. And so to get ambulances posted out there and what are reasonable response times becomes much more challenging because they're not going to be generating the same revenue because they're not doing as many calls. So some of those plans are fairly expensive and maybe not something that I can necessarily get off the rip, but I think if we can get the western part of the county sort of shored up, I think that we could extend that out to the 22 corridor at some point. Just to take the most expensive sort of plan here, right? So if we were to have 2.5 ambulances between the town of Spadco and the town of Brunswick, the cost of that is somewhere around 50 cents per thousand, which comes out to be about $150 a year if you divide it up. And so what does $150 a year approximately get you? Well, so you can buy a large call if you get stewards every week, and that'll cost you $123 a year, right? So forgo basically one call per week, plus a couple, plus an extra one every couple of weeks. We could afford this. Standard Netflix subscription is $215 a year, right? Probably a pretty robust system if everybody were to forgo their Netflix subscription. No, I'm not saying that you should do that, but we could pay for this, right? For these sorts of things. Garbage removal. I looked at my I haven't looked at my waste removal bill in a long time. Oh man, I'm paying a lot of money for this. But it's true, $400 a year, right? We could pay for, we could have an ambulance on every other freaking block. Not that we need that, but again, perspective here, I think, this is less than half the cost of getting the garbage removed every week. Are there some other sources of funding? There are some grants out there. I'll talk about one here in a minute that I think may help get things up and started. Again, with a shared services and or mergers type model. If everybody were to be on the same page, could the county contribute some money to sort of lower the barriers, maybe especially when we're trying to add on something like the Route 22 corridor, to be able to make that a more financially feasible thing to do? Again, it would have to be the whole county would have to be on board with doing something, and it'd have to be a fair agreement. I've had a discussion with the county executive, and he said that it's not off the table. So it's something that's reasonable if we can manage to get together and work as one EMS system. Fund drives can potentially generate a little bit of revenue as well. I'm not sure how much, but those are all possible sources. So the one big grant that I'm aware of that could is sort of geared towards helping with things like this is something called the Local Government Efficiency Grant. It's been going for several years on a yearly basis. Last year, it actually did not receive enough submissions, and they reopened it halfway through the year. So that money is out there, it's just sitting there waiting for somebody to use it. And so this is sort of what it looks like. And one of their primary goals is for emergency services, projects that involve enhancement to or restructuring of local government, fire, police, and emergency medical services. EMS right there. And so there's a planning grant part, and there's an implementation grant part of things. And the implementation grant, I'm told, is something like, $225. It's a 9-10 grant, something like $225,000 for every municipality that's involved, right? So these could help with like the restructuring, the mergers, maybe even some, supplement the first year or two of operations between these shared services, et cetera. We just have to be able to get people to agree on this. Unfortunately, the date for this one already passed back in January. Maybe they'll reopen it, so maybe there's a possibility there's still some money out there and we can reopen it. Or, I think probably the more likely thing is if we can all get our act together by next January, we would have a good shot at sort of getting this in a robust way. So the next steps from my end is sort of continued discussion with the EMS agencies and elected leaders about sort of the challenges that we have here in Rensselaer County, And again, what sort of solutions we have, and then to try and gather support and educate the public about what is really going on, what we can do to fix it. And again, if somebody has a really great idea, I really truly mean it. I do want to hear it. But this is sort of the best that I've been able to come up with. I really appreciate you all showing up tonight, taking time out of your busy lives. I am happy to answer questions. Please take a look at sort of the plans that I've sort of put out there. Think about things. Reach out. Reach out to your local, local leaders. Reach out to your local ambulance services and sort of see what's going on and sort of come together to fix this problem. All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So there's an overall technology probably communication, but based on the county, I don't know, what are the number of paramedic ambulances now, and what is the number that would, I don't know if ideal is the right word, because you probably can't afford ideal, but like what would be your middle to higher than your number of ambulances per now?
Perfect. Thank you for asking that. So this would be like the idea here. This is plan one if you look at my books, etc. Is where so City of Troy has Troy Fire Department, which provides ambulance services there. They are a pretty good service. They're very busy. They sometimes need extra help or whatnot. They're sort of figuring out if they can put extra resources on to sort of alleviate some of those stresses. They're sort of doing their own thing, and I don't include them in the rest of the county. I'm not opposed to it. There are just many challenges that come to working with sort of a city fire department like that. Again, open to discussions, etc. But there's a lot of time. So the rest of these plans are really based on everything outside of the city of Troy. And it's not to say that we couldn't work with the city of Troy. There could be absolutely robust mutual aid ambulance responses into the city and out of the city. I think it would be fantastic actually, because parts of Brunswick obviously border the city of Troy, and you probably have a pretty fast response with some of their units. So the rest of the county here altogether, I think on the most robust end, if you had 13 and a half ambulances, and it's sort of strategically located, as you can see up here. If you want to get into the real weeds of this, every A there is a paramedic level ambulance. The Fs are sort of, when I try to figure out how we can continue to utilize the fantastic resources of our volunteers in our communities, etc. My thought was instead of sort of currently some places have volunteer ambulances where the volunteer gets on the ambulance, right? They drive to the scene, they take care of the patient, they drive to the hospital. I'm sure everybody's heard that hospital wait times are a real challenge these days. So the ambulance will sometimes sit for an hour or two at the hospital waiting to turn it over, and then they got to drive back to the station, restock and everything. And so many of these volunteers are spending 2, 3, 4 hours on some of these calls, especially if it's a 3 a.m. call and they have to be able to work at 8 a.m. That is really challenging for people to do these days. And so to alleviate some of that stress but still continue to use them, the idea of some of these plans is to instead have fully staffed ambulances, paid ambulance staff at the paramedic level, right? So every ambulance is a paramedic level, but have first response EMTs, right? So be able to have first response vehicles that, a volunteer EMT maybe could even take the truck home for the night or whatnot, so they don't have to drive to the station and then pick up the ambulance and go. They can just go right from their house. And if they get a call that's around the corner from them, they'll be right there. It's fantastic. They can do things like start CPR. They can have a defibrillator in the back, an AED, and you have a paramedic ambulance coming as well. And that way, if the call is so bad that they need the extra set of hands in the back, that volunteer can jump on the ambulance, or if they just want to ride it in anyways, they can absolutely jump on the ambulance. Alternatively, if the patient doesn't, just needs a ride to the hospital but doesn't need a whole lot of care, they can help out and make sure that everything's okay initially, and then they can go back home and go back to sleep. So alleviate some of the stress, but you still have extended this responder network out and gives them a way to still contribute, I think, substantially to their communities. So anyways, long story, all those blue Fs on there are those vehicles, and they're in current places where there currently are volunteer stations that exist. So some of that's priced into this plan a little bit.
So are your aides current paramedic staff?
They are not. They are not. So the current, so you can see on the second column there where it says current. Yep, so there's how much each individual town, and this is 2023 data, but because this is a lot to put together, and I haven't been able to punch all the numbers yet for 2024. 2023 data, but you can see down there number of ALS ambulances. 5 ALS ambulances plus however many Mohawk Ambulance has available in the county, which can vary. Mohawk Ambulance is a big company. They do a pretty good job. They are for profit, so they benefit from having their ambulances constantly in motion and trying to move patients. They have a lot of responsibilities in taking patients in and out of hospitals, to nursing homes, etc. And so the downside of not having a dedicated ambulance, for example, in the town of Brunswick, is that that ambulance, if it's idle, is going to get used to do something else. And so it may or may not be here when a call comes in. And so we don't know how many Mohawk has at any given time. That's been part of the challenge. Sometimes, again, they have very robust responses. Sometimes their ambulances are coming from a really long ways away, or they don't have one to go. So, yeah, it's a bit of a jump to get to 13 and a half. And, people have asked me sort of, where are you going to find all these paramedics, et cetera. I will be honest, 13 ALS ambulances is going to be a little bit challenging. That's going to take some time to get to. But I think we could put on a fair number. There are agencies currently, North Greenbush and Sand Lake, run about 2/3 of their crews have double paramedic crews currently, because their employees are so sort of happy doing this there, et cetera. So if we continue to have a good work environment for these people that are happy and they feel like they're making a difference, et cetera, you can take those paramedics and give them additional EMT partners, which are a little bit easier to find. Not a dime a dozen, but a little bit easier to find. And then you can sort of extend what we currently have. And I think we can go pretty far with that. I have a number of my flight paramedics, so again, I'm a medical director for Lifeline. A number of my flight paramedics live in Rensselaer County. These are fantastic providers who take care of the sickest of the sick people, really advanced skills, et cetera, top of their profession. They just aren't jobs here that they want to work or whatnot. Many of them will go to other counties or other places, even though they live in Rensselaer County, because there's a more robust EMS system across the river from us. Okay. So we lose a lot of our talent. So I've gotten, I don't know, probably a dozen or more texts from different paramedics who again live here and or grew up here or would love to come back and work in their hometown, et cetera. But we just don't have an EMS system that supports it right now. We don't fund it. And so I think we could get a lot of it. 13 ambulances, I don't know. That would take some time. But again, if we had a good EMS system, providers are happy and doing quality care and feeling like they're really making a difference, this is something where we can mentor the next line of paramedics, right? We have a fantastic paramedic program in our county, literally. Hudson Valley Community College is one of the major paramedic programs in the area. It's in our county. Paramedics just don't stay here because we don't fund it. We don't fund them to stay here. So I think we could get there. It would take a little bit. It's not going to happen. Did that answer your question?
Kind of.
Kind of.
Keep that many more actual physical vehicles plus people.
Oh, these ambulances are already here.
Okay, so the vehicles are.
And I'll say that probably 2/3 of the equipment for that is also already here. Because all these paramedics, all the ALS agencies that are current, pretty much not every, but probably 3/4 of the ambulance services that are currently here have a spare ambulance anyways. Do we really need all those spare ambulances? Not to mention, all those individual agencies have at least one ambulance. So we have at least 14 ambulances in the county. Again, they're just not all running at the same time. And as far as paramedic gear sets, we need a little bit more, but all the ALS agencies already have a spare gear set to begin with. So would we need to buy some more? Yes, but honestly, I think we could beef up to this in a matter of weeks if we really wanted to. Yeah, but I think the time is right for it. I think it's time for it. All right, sorry. Yes.
Doc, the agencies that you kind of talked about, North Greenbush, Sand Lake, Bruin, Hoosick Valley, I'm aware that the medics that are riding in those agencies, many of them are off-duty Albany and Troy firefighters working their B job.
Correct.
All right. So the costs are artificially held down for those communities because they're not paying a big bill for health insurance, they're not paying for a big retirement system, and some of the other employee benefits that would be there for say a medic in the town of Colony.
Absolutely.
Right? So how does that artificiality affect your numbers? And then second question is, you know, as you grow this out and you need more medics, are there enough Albany and Troy firefighters that need B jobs? Or how do you find enough qualified medics to grow this out?
No, I appreciate your question, and those are great questions. So again, right now we have some pent up resources in our communities already, because again, some of those, and yes, there are many off-duty Albany firefighters, Troy firefighters, etc., who are working at these agencies, but they're pretty happy doing it. I'll be honest, at North Greenbush, and I don't know how they do this still to this day, they have some of their paramedics working for EMT pay out there, if they're the second paramedic, because they're so happy working there. I don't understand. God bless them. But so that's part of making it a good work environment is an absolutely critical part of this, and taking care of them. Now, part of taking care of people is people who don't have those civil service benefits and other jobs. We have to take care of those people. I will fight tooth and nail for these folks, because I think EMS providers are underpaid, and the benefits that they get do not reflect the work that they do. Personally, sort of across the board in their job. So the finances of it. So to give you a little bit of frame of reference, so North Greenbush Ambulance is currently sort of the leader in efficiency. They run 2 ambulances during the day and 1 ambulance at night, which in my calculations is 1.5 ambulances. Right? They do that at an average cost per ambulance of about $750,000. So their cost is substantially below, about $100,000 to $150,000 below my estimates there. Right? Sand Lake is closer to $850,000. Same thing, the Hoosick Valley Rescue Squad is a little bit higher than that. Bruin is slightly higher than that. I think that what you get, though, is when you combine these services, you get some degree of efficiency. Again, instead of needing 3 spare ambulances, you need 2 spare ambulances. Instead of needing 3 spare gear sets, you need 2 spare gear sets. So there's some investment costs there. And then I think that if you can make some of those ambulances a little bit more efficient, you get some cost savings there. What I think, though, happens is that cost savings is going to need to be eaten up by benefits to our providers. And I think that's where that money comes from. And so the efficiency part of things, I think maybe we could save a little bit of money, but it might also be break even. But that is because the idea is that cost efficiency and having 1 manager instead of 2 managers, 2 ambulances instead of 3 ambulances, et cetera, allows for more providers that are not employed at other places to get benefits if they are full-time at these agencies. So that's the idea of it. This is not I'm not a financial guy. I'm a physician. I take care of people for a living. This is my poor attempt at public discourse and policy and finances. So I hope there aren't any CPAs in the room, because I'm pretty screwed if there are. But that's the idea behind it. Are all these numbers exactly on? Probably not. And chances are the cost is probably going to be a little bit higher than what I'm saying here. Again, these are based on 2023 numbers. But I think they're probably still in the ballpark. And even if it's a little bit higher, I think with that a little bit higher, we could pay for benefits.
I agree with that, and quite honestly, I'm looking at your cost per $300,000 house. I can tell you, I live in North Greenbush. I pay the money that we pay in North Greenbush. What most people don't realize is that in North Greenbush, we pay more for our town library than we do for our ambulance.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm thinking that we have something that's actually for everybody in town. We know we have to work in town industry with each other. And every year I hear from our county executive that he's proud of the surplus that we have in the county. So why isn't the county executive and the county administrator for you being more proactive about helping to resolve this problem?
So great question. And I think there is, there's some, definitely more could be done. I don't disagree with that. I think that the challenge from a political standpoint on all of this is that, again, because there are so many different agencies with different needs, it has become a little bit, and things like this have been tried a couple of times in the past. on smaller levels in general. But it has become a little bit of a circular firing squad where one agency says, oh, I really would just want this part of it. The other agency just wants that part of it. And no, we're pretty good. We don't want to participate. And so for this to work out politically means that everybody has to be on the same page.
But it also seems like a reason for the county to take more control.
I agree. And that is what I am out here trying to do. Now, I don't know that the county necessarily needs to take more control. They certainly could play a role in helping to facilitate this or some of the cost. But from a leadership perspective, what I think needs to happen before all that is that these individual agencies and towns need to be pointed in the same direction. I think if everybody were to be on the same page, I think I would have a compelling argument to be able to have a greater discussion with the county executive about sort of getting at that.
Why don't you explain what happened in Columbia County?
Yeah, so, I mean, Columbia County is another sort of model where they had a number of different agencies and they've slowly consolidated over time. And actually all of the different agencies that are currently there are able to work together. They've gotten a single county CON that allows people to cross lines. Beyond just being able to cross lines though, there's an agreement where there's some cost sharing where if there's a deficit of ambulances in one part of the county, some of those other ambulances will move over. And there is some financial support to make that sort of thing happen. So there's a number of different models where, I think that the county can support our EMS system without taking ownership of it. I think that the politics and the leadership at the county level just is not, they're not ready to sort of get involved. Again, I think if I can get everybody sort of on the same page, I have a more compelling argument to get greater support. But I would not wait around for something to come down from the top because it's a fragmented system that we still have with fragmented. I'm sorry, that's all I have. I don't know if that sort of answered your question. It doesn't sound like it's what you like.
Well, it just seems kind of backwards.
It might be. It might be.
Not letting you.
Yeah. But yes.
Have you ever presented in the county legislature at meetings?
I have not been presented to the county legislator. I have been invited. I have a lot of different jobs and get very little sleep. It is on my list of things to do, but I haven't made it there yet. So
That might be, that group might be.
it will facilitate something.
So for Brunswick specifically, and this might be like slightly outside of your scope, but is the reason that we aren't able to provide mutual aid because we don't have contracted services with Mohawk, even though they have a facility in our town?
Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you my take on it, and then there's some leaders from some of the other agencies who they can sort of explain why they do what they do. In general, the term mutual aid means that it has to be mutual, it has to be able to go both ways. Again, I have nothing against Mohawk Ambulance. I actually worked there back 2004 to 2008. Had a good time. It was sort of my start in EMS, and I still have lifelong friends from working there. So a lot of respect. They do a lot of very good work. But again, they're a for-profit ambulance company, and the way to make money off of this is, as you see, doing primary 911 EMS calls is a money-losing venture in general. And so they have to be able to make money somehow, and they do that by supplementing with other sort of transports, et cetera, and they try and keep the wheels spinning. And so as a result of that, of all these resources being stretched thin, including Mohawk, they get pulled over to Albany, or they're doing a transport out of Samaritan. And so the ambulance that would be on standby here, unfortunately, is doing one of those things. And then another ambulance has to cross, and it becomes the whole thing. And so because there's nobody here reliably to be able to cross the line and go back, it's not really, the other agencies don't consider that mutual in nature. So the benefit of having a contracted ambulance, again, whoever that service provider may be in the town of Brunswick, is that hopefully at that point, it would be easier to convince those other services that they are in fact getting mutual aid, and then be able to have that, you unlock all these other ambulances that can come into the town. So I don't know if some of the other ambulance services, Ryan, do you want to?
One of you.
Ryan French, North Michigan. So from our standpoint, obviously we do have mutual aid partners, Bruin, Sand Lake, and Hoosick Valley, and the city of Troy. These are all mutual aid agreements that we worked out with these jurisdictions, because they, in our opinion, supply appropriate service to their community that they can reciprocate service back to our community. So, for example, North Greenbush does go all the way to Hoosick Valley, driving through the town of Brunswick or the city of Troy to do mutual aid as Hoosick Valley comes to us. One thing Warren did talk about before was when you're designing a plan like this and designing ambulances where they need to be, is the appropriate amount of ambulances. We can't sign on to mutual aid agreements with agencies that don't have the appropriate amount of ambulances, because then we're just going to them and they're not helping us, and now we're losing service from our residents. So one of the things that's been talked about with building this is making sure that we actually are staffing sufficiently throughout the county and not just saying we have an ambulance, we're all set. We need more than one ambulance, then that needs to be taken care of. The mutual aid thing all goes back to years ago, I think it was 2010, when the county kind of tried to break things up between Mohawk and Empire, and it didn't really work out as planned per se, and DOH basically came in and told all of the agencies, you can only do mutual aid. Stop going places that you're not supposed to go. And told us that we were absolutely crazy and breaking the law to do it, and told us all basically to seek our own legal advice. And we all did, and that's kind of what brought us to where we are today.
And Lynn, you guys want to talk about
I don't know whether I've got anything to add to that other than a very similar experience, right? We love to help out, but we can't. It's just not financially feasible for us to put our ambulance in other parts of the county. We will be out of business in 6 months.
Can I ask them both to discuss the mutual aid between fire departments versus EMS and what the difference is in the state so that the lay people understand what that is?
I don't know whether I can speak to fire
Way to
department.
do it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna really be able to speak so well to the fire department mutual aid system. Can you?
Fire department mutual aid is based on state law, where fire departments and towns are legally responsible to provide fire protection, all right? And the mutual aid is based on the state law, where they're required to go mutual aid to each other. And each fire department in the state of New York is required to sign on to a mutual aid plan. Doesn't necessarily have to be the county's mutual aid plan or the state mutual aid plan. It's got to be a mutual aid plan. 99.9, I think, do sign on to their own county's plan and their the state plan. So it's a very, very well-defined historic document that goes back in state fire law. EMS, on the other hand, since EMS has still not been determined by the state legislature or the governor to be an essential service, this is still it's up in the air. So it's a home rule thing. I keep screaming. I keep hearing people saying that this is something the county ought to fix, this is something the state ought to fix. It's a town problem. It's got to be fixed at the local level. And once the locals have fixed it and got some kind of equity, then we can look at growing it out, just as Doc has done up here, into maybe a regional system within the county or a full county system. But we got to grow it out at least to an equitable system between the towns.
Melody, you want to talk about the valley?
Yeah, so for Hoosick Valley, right, we're a little bit further out. Most of our primary mutual aid is with Saratoga County. So that being said, for us, a lot of the times there is nobody else. So for us to take our one ambulance that we have on 24/7 out of our town, it leaves us with absolutely nothing, and the thought of maybe no one coming as well. I mean, we find that most of our calls are at a nursing home, and even some of the mutual aid people don't want to take those calls out of nursing homes. So it gets very difficult for us, and we have to try to find, how many calls do you miss in your own town to make it, to have it worth it to go somewhere else. In my eyes, if we miss one call in Scatico for someone who paid for that service for, say, someone in Brunswick or Poston Hill or Grafton, anywhere, then it could be a real problem. So we would like to take care of our taxpayers.
With that said, we want mutual aid.
Yeah, I think everybody benefits. So many of the really delayed responses are when it is not when the primary ambulance service is out and there's nobody else. Not all of them. Sometimes they're just really long delays because there just isn't an ambulance coming. But many of the long delays are because we haven't been able to work together and get the next closest ambulance to be able to respond.
Just with what Brian said, we want mutual aid partners. A lot has been tossed around about North Greenbush, Sand Lake, Bruin, Hoosick Valley, how we kind of work together. But just to give you an example, like there's a 1.5 up there, like you need 1.5 ambulances. Sometimes that's kind of hard to grasp. All three towns and agencies are doing the best we can to answer the calls within our district, but there are times we're stressed. The three towns of Sand Lake, East Greenbush, and North Greenbush being so close is a great example of kind of the shared services that Doc's talking about. I would have to imagine, not once a day, but very frequently throughout a week, you'll hear one of our agencies in the neighboring town, because the neighboring town can't afford to staff to answer all calls at once. That would just be an astronomical cost. So that's our shared services. We have 5 ambulances on during the day between the 3 towns, and there's times where Hoosick Valley has gotten dispatched, Troy Fire has gotten dispatched to North Greenbush because Bruins, both their ambulances are out, Sand Lake's ambulance is out, Hoosick Valley can't come. Mohawk has a station right down the road, but they're not able to answer up to help out. So it's not that any of us aren't doing mutual aid, but we're providing a mutual service. And when you start to pull our services from our 3 jurisdictions and go somewhere else, and then those individuals who pay for something don't have it, that's where the problem was arising. And that's where the state kind of came in and said, you need to take a big look at what you're doing. So if you look at those 3 towns, it gives you a very good example, a working example of what Doc is trying to talk about.
And again, so sometimes all those ambulances are out, but you also saw those response curves in that, 5 to 10 minutes on most of their calls, they arrive on the scene. And so they have what I would consider appropriate resources for their towns and their call line. Other questions? Yeah.
No, just another thing that you said in the other questions, I was, the other one was, is we're not seeing a lot of people coming into this field. What we're seeing, after I asked a question about it, I did a lot more research. We're seeing a lot of these paramedics and EMTs, what they're doing is going to school for it. But then what they're doing is going to work in the hospital settings because of the amount of benefits that are available for them, the jobs that are available, and the schedules that are available for them here. What was it? They said, how many was it? 44 was the 44 people came on board as EMTs for a service for a county this size, but they went elsewhere for work. So it's an investment by the towns, cities, and villages for these services. Because when I did my article, I had one person ask me how much is a person's life worth, and they wanted people to answer that, like, what's a person's actual life worth today? Is it worth that $1.25 or is it worth $1.50? Where do we go with this here? My mother lives in Johnsonville, and she was, I would say, a victim of this crisis. Couldn't get ALS. My mother got ALS from Malta Stillwater. They came from Malta to my mother in Johnsonville, 41 minutes. I still have the recording to this day. 41 minutes. So, for when my mother was hospitalized with open pneumonia. So.
It's challenging, hopefully, again, it's not new, but the crisis is real.
So I actually live in North Greenbush, but I'm a nurse here in Brunswick at the DO program. And oftentimes we do have to call the ambulance, and our wait times they're horrible. We had Eagle Mills responded within 6 minutes today, which is wonderful. And Mohawk was 25, but I believe they were coming from a minute. So anytime there's a call, there's a delay just coming even to the day program, which is right across the street from the school. So that's really scary. That, I mean, granted, I'm a nurse, I have another nurse with me, but we can only do so much.
You need that backup, and, especially if you need care at the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing to do, and, I think all the firefighters in the room have been stuck on a scene with a sick patient for a long time. It is a very uncomfortable feeling, very helpless feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Yeah.
You talk about Mohawk and mutual aid, they were on the news the other night, but they're an agency in crisis for employees, so how do you expect them to help? They don't have the employees either, right?
So,
Expect Troy Fire to help, we have 4 ambulances, one staff with overtime, not every day, most days. One is a full-time ambulance, it does 4,500 calls a year, you think that's safe? No. And then we had 2 ambulances that jump with a ladder truck and a fire engine. So if we send one of them out into the county and we have a fire and a family of 4 is trapped, we save one life and more.
No, I agree. I think you guys need more resources, just like everybody else is.
Right, and how do we condense the paramedic and EMT programs to get people out on the street quicker, right?
You just want to make sure that, you want to make sure everybody's adequately, trained, et cetera, but.
So back to the B-job thing that I talked about, let's just say a catastrophe hit, a tornado, a couple of tornadoes come through the area. All those firefighters are gonna be forced back to their primary jobs. Who's working all those agencies out in the county?
Well, so that's where, again, I think the benefit of having a more robust EMS system in the county is that, as people have mentioned, we're gonna need, more paramedics, et cetera. You're right, we don't throw them out of thin air, right? It takes time to train them, et cetera, get them experience, so on and so forth. But it is a matter of providing good quality services and with benefits and things that every other job in the U.S. sort of offers, right? To be able to take care of those people and make it an actual career. And what I find is that the really robust agencies that I've been, and I've worked in a whole bunch of different places, including many in New York State as well as out west, in Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma. The really robust agencies develop their younger people. There's a career ladder for them to grow through. There is a feeling of sort of growth and mentorship, and these high quality programs can foster that. And then you get really great paramedics who are happy coming to work, happy taking care of people, take great care of people, right? And then pass that on. And they are members of our community, et cetera, and there's just so many benefits that can come from that. And again, I don't think the cost of something like that is out of reach.
One of the points that you don't mention is growing the count from 5 ambulances to 13. That's putting roughly 50 additional people to work in this county. That is a significant amount of people in this county. The County Economic Development Authority pays about $50,000 a job when they help organizations start jobs, start new businesses, that kind of stuff. So this is significant from an economic perspective.
And again, the hope is with the robust EMS system, yes, you'll get fast responses, hopefully we can save more people's lives. I have to be honest, the health economics are incredibly challenging because when we save somebody's life who's really sick or whatnot, they lots of times need weeks of ICU care, which is incredibly expensive, and we have to get them through all that. And so many times when we really, what I think is make a worthwhile difference in people's lives, the expense is fairly substantial. But there are things on the other side of this. Again, I talked about the diabetic person, who if we just start an IV and give them some glucose, we can avoid them going to the hospital. There are lots of other creative things that other places are doing. There's some things called community paramedicine programs where they try and keep people out of the hospital, try and prevent sort of people's congestive heart failure from getting worse, et cetera. And those sorts of programs, again, if we had a robust system here, could potentially help to lower some of those healthcare costs for people across the board. So, yeah, the economics of it are challenging. Certainly, it's a lot of jobs, and again, I'd love to keep them here if we can. I think Rensselaer County is a wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful place to work. We just, we got to fund this appropriately. Yeah.
I'd just like to bring up, I know a couple people tonight mentioned about EMS essential service. Well, New York State does not recognize it. There is a bill that started last year. It was assembly. It got passed step 1. As far as the last time
working out for them to become stronger, bigger, more robust. And I think it's something that we really need to look at, if we're going to survive. Yes, it's a lot of legwork, yes, it's a lot of legal paperwork and stuff, but, I can tell you for sure, I spoke to the supervisor in Stillwater, when the Stillwater Rescue Squad and Malton merged, he said it was the best thing that they ever did. He said they have 3 ALS rigs on around the clock. They have 1 in Stillwater, 2 in Malton. They backfill each other. But he said it's bringing, they're answering calls quicker. They're able to do things more. So it's certainly, yes, it's a lot of growing pains, and it's going to be, a lot of changes. But sometimes change is good.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Yep, over here.
First, really thank you for this very clear presentation and all the work and amazing planning and analysis you must have done. It's really impressive and scary and eye-opening. And most of all, thank you for caring about the community. That's amazing. As a Brunswick resident, I'm flabbergasted that I'm not paying anything apparently. What for that's embarrassing. I have 2 questions. Okay. One question is why we're not paying anything. The second question is, do you have any? I know this is super hard, but do you have any rough estimate what like this plan that's shown here? What would that do to like a response time? Do you have any rough estimate or?
So predicting that is a little bit difficult for multiple reasons. So the call volume, if I remember correctly, is somewhere around 1,200 calls in 2024 for the town of Brunswick.
12,000.
Sorry, 1,200 calls. 1,200, not 12,000. Sorry, been a long day. 1,200 calls in the town of Brunswick. It depends on so part of this is geography, right? So the roads, how you can get from one place to another will change sort of how quickly you can get from one area to another. Where you can place a station is also another consideration. So building a new station, buying property, that's like some really challenging things to do. So likely this would have to be in somewhere where sort of, to start with, somewhere that is convenient, et cetera. I think that, stationing an ambulance in here, I think you could achieve similar numbers, honestly, to Sand Lake and North Greenbush in the end. They might a little bit slower than them because some of the sort of distances to different areas. But at the same time, if you were to have a robust mutual aid system, for example, there was the call that I read the letter for in the town of Eagle Mills. North Greenbush was there in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, right? And so something like that, it is not unreasonable to get that sort of mutual aid coming. So maybe your mutual aid will come even faster than your primary ambulance could in some cases. And I think most of these towns, Sand Lake, North Greenbush, if somebody else can get there faster and take great care, let them do that. Your primary ambulance can even still come and transport the patient and do all that, but if it's a really bad, this is a cardiac arrest, a really bad traffic accident, it is not unheard of for North Greenbush to sort of, start heading towards Sand Lake if there's something bad there, or vice versa. Right? They work together very well. And all of these guys are, they're out there to do the right things, right? Yes, this is their job, but this is a calling for most of them.
I could just add to that a little bit. So my understanding is when I help around saying, like, you could build something very similar to what we have for very similar costs and have very similar response times and outcomes. And just as an example, yesterday, right, I think is a clear example of what we can build is that we had a very, very sick patient with 6 minutes, 7 minute response time. We were able to get on the phone and Dr. Hashi actually came out and helped us out, right? So that's, really very good care for these people at $400,000 a year, right? So I don't think that you can get great response times, you can get really, really good care. We have excellent people work for us that take really good care of our citizens, and I don't think it's a heavy lift for you guys to be able to do the same.
Cup of coffee a week, I'm sold.
Thank you very much for your information. I'm a Brunswick resident. I kind of think I keep up with what's going on. I'm a medical person too, and I'm embarrassed, flabbergasted. I always assumed we had ambulance, and I think
sure Rensselaer County is that much different. We got a lot of demographic similarities with mountains, so it's harder to get places. There was a proposal given to the county a while back with 5 or 6 zones. I know that times are changing, you have to make adjustments to that. And there's quite a few resources out there between volunteers, like you said, volunteers and paid people that are working in the systems as paid medics. That could create a career path. There's still some opportunities for the volunteers to stay involved and keep those regions staffed. I think the county is not had the wake up call that everybody's on the Titanic and there's not enough lifeboats. And that's sort of, I don't think everybody's getting the message. You're creating a limelight to it, that's helping a lot. But my personal feeling is the county's got to be the savior to it. And the towns are gonna have to pay and have their towns are covered by medics. I don't see any, if you want to get to where you need to be to actually save people, like a few people mentioned here, I don't see any alternative to that. And I think this is creating a good spotlight on what's going to happen in the pretty soon.
Obviously, been out there, and as I said, those sort of 4 regional models, and one of those was whether the sheriff's department would do something similar to Albany County Sheriff's Office. And again, I think all 4 of those models are possible. I think that there are a lot of challenges with many of them, and I think there's sort of the political ability to be able to do some of those, I think, is less likely. And many of us in the EMS community have been waiting decades for this to sort of get fixed, et cetera. I see the shared services and mergers model as something that we can work towards getting to where we want to be. And that's not to say that this couldn't morph into something later on, et cetera. But I think the starting point is to try and get wherever we can some success and sort of share it, work together. And again, if the whole EMS system can come together, some of these other options potentially could be on the table. That's what I would say. But I think the most likely way to get any sort of progress is to start small. And honestly, while I'd love to have some of these bigger models, 3, 4, 5, half the county, the whole county sort of models, I think the most likely things to succeed at first are going to be 2 towns getting together. And once that model succeeds, I think other people are going to want to latch on, which is great.
So I guess I'm wondering, what do we do now? Like, I'm not an EMT, I'm not a firefighter, but I am a taxpayer and I do have a voice and I'm happy to do what I need to do. Can you just kind of guide us into?
Yeah, so this is my second meeting like this in sort of the public realm. I had one at the Post and Hill Firehouse. I've had obviously one now in Brunswick here. I'd like to have one down in the south end of the county at some point to sort of talk down there a little bit. There's been some individual municipalities, so I've had conversations with a number of elected leaders. I've spoken to the town board of Posting Field, who has a in fact, I say their problem is even worse than the town of Brunswick currently. I've spoken to the town board there a number of times, and they had actually twice at town board meetings now and once at their workshop, and they are in the process of figuring out what they want to do. They're getting close, I think, to potentially doing some action. Brunswick, the town board, I recommend that you watch. I don't know. Are you a resident of the town of Brunswick?
I am.
Yeah. So the town board meetings in I think January and definitely in March sort of address some of the CMS issues, and I've been able to talk to some of the elected leaders and certainly the public safety committee here about these challenges and problems. And I've sort of brought this plan forward as a possibility. They are exploring things. There's a complicated process in New York State about which ambulances are allowed to operate in which districts, and that's controlled by something called a certificate of need. Currently, the only agency that holds a certificate, well, I shouldn't say, there are 2 agencies that hold a certificate of need, meaning that they can operate in the town of Brunswick and bill patients for transport in the town of Brunswick. Those 2 agencies are Mohawk Ambulance Service, who holds one for all of Rensselaer County, and Ambulance, which is another commercial ambulance service that primarily does work up in Cohoes currently, but holds the CON for Rensselaer County as well. But those are the only 2 services that are allowed to operate in the town of Brunswick and bill for their services. Other ambulances can come in, technically as if it is truly mutual aid, but there's no mutual aid back, so there's some question about whether they can really technically bill if they do transport in. And it's not that everything's about billing, but these agencies do have to pay their bills and provide it. two ways to sort of get these, a certificate of need for the town of Brunswick. Somebody could apply, an agency of any variety could apply for a certificate of need. I think that they have a relatively strong case based on the Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety's data that I sort of presented here. But it would be a long, sort of drawn out argument, and I think there would be some pushback from other entities that currently operate. So that would take a while to go through. The alternative option is there's something called a municipal CON, which is where a municipality, town, county, etc., can apply for municipal CON. And there's some previous case law that basically says that if a town or a municipality sort of applies for that, then they almost automatically get it. And then they can decide who operates in their town. They can give that municipal CON to whoever they decide to. They can do it themselves as a municipal service, or they can contract out with somebody else to do that. The town of Brunswick is deciding whether they want to apply for a municipal CON, so they can control who works here. And then the question is who, if you want to do one of the shared services models, do you want to do that? Do you want to try and contract with Mohawk so that they are sort of required to provide a 24/7 ambulance in town? That would also be, again, if that happens, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate to the guys in North Greenbush or Sand Lake or Hoosick Valley that ambulance is in fact, a robust response here, and that it's going to provide mutual aid services back and forth. That's what you haven't had, and why again they're not doing mutual aid currently, because they don't think that they're going to get it in return. So the question, honestly, it's talking to the elected leaders. They're aware of it. Watch the town board meetings. They've been sort of discussing it, and that's where I recommend. And if you have questions or want to talk to me or see more of the data, again, all the data, especially for the town of Brunswick, is sort of in the binders up here. I'm happy to sort of discuss it more, but I think it's a matter of expressing that there's a willpower that we, in fact, that I shouldn't say we, because I don't live in the town of Brunswick, so that you guys, whether you want to pay for service at what sort of level you want to pay for service, which providers you want to service your community. I think that the elected leaders are always hesitant to raise taxes, right? This money has to come from taxes somehow. And so they need to feel that they're going to get public support for this to happen for them to push forward. I think that they're on that line right now, so they need to hear from it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for advocating for our loved ones. I wasn't aware of this situation or the crisis that we're dealing with right now, but I wanted to piggyback on a comment that was made earlier, that it appears that Rensselaer County as a whole would recreate or rebuild this EMS structure, the system. And our county executive has reported in the state of the county how healthy each county is. In fact, some of the towns, the little towns, are having their taxes lower or they're being held. So I think that there might be some possibilities there. I invite you to encourage that conversation as you foster it in economic.
I can absolutely continue that conversation. I don't think, again, that there's sort of political will to take the system on as a whole. Again, and I think it's partly because there's been so much infighting over the years, et cetera, that it's a politically challenging thing to do. But again, I think that if, every time I have these meetings, everybody's surprised at the numbers. They're like, yes, you want to do something. Oh, geez, yeah, I'll pay $150, whatever a year for this to happen. You have to be able to take care of people the right way. I think that if this is across the county, this becomes a much easier sort of political lift to get some support. I don't know what that support will be. It might be, I don't know. But yes, I will continue to sort of advocate for the county as a whole. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Good? No? You're good. All right. Good job. All right.
Thank you.
Everybody.